Chapter 1. A sound beneath the silence. Marley Coombe was the sort of village where change was as rare as a summer frost, and that suited its residents just fine. Tucked into the gentle folds of Gloucestershire's hills, it gleamed like an old brooch on the English countryside, small, intricate, and easily missed by those not looking closely. It was the second Thursday of October when the silence splintered. The day had unfolded in its usual orderly rhythm. At precisely 8 o'clock, Reverend Pilling pedaled past the post office, his two short trousers flapping and his cheeks ruddy from the climb up Markham Hill. By mid-morning, the warm, sugary scent of treacle buns drifted from Mrs. Hargreaves's bakery, while two children earned a scolding for plucking conkers too near the vicarage wall. Everything was as it should be. Miss Marple had spent much of the day tending her rosebush, her gloved hands coaxing the last stubborn summer blooms that defied autumn's approach. She paused only once, distracted by the reckless clatter of hoofs from young Freddie Morgan's pony trap. Always too fast for the narrow lanes, and too proud to admit it. At 92, Miss Marple was a village treasure, not in a patronizing way, but held in the same quiet reverence as the church bell or the ancient yew beside the graveyard. She belonged. More than that, she knew things not like the police with their notebooks and heavy boots, but like an old diary, quiet, intimate, and endlessly patient. As dusk settled, she sat with a cup of weak Darjeeling, leafing through a gardening magazine delivered that morning. A faint creak broke the silence, halting the turn of a page. It was soft but deliberate. Miss Marple froze, listening. The sound came from across the lane, from the abandoned Hargreaves house, once a proud Georgian home of honey-colored brick. It now crouched in shadow, its shuttered windows like eyes refusing to see the world. No one had lived there since Major Hargreaves died in his sleep 5 winters past. Son, Nicholas, a man of grand ambitions but fleeting presence, had long since fled to London's hum, never looking back. The sound came again, not a creak, but a shift, as if a floorboard in the hallway had groaned under a slow, careful step. Miss Marple rose, her movements precise and unhurried, and crossed to the window. Through the lace curtains, the Hargreaves house glowed faintly in the amber light of early evening. No movement, no lamps, no sound but the distant sputter of a motor car on the back road. Then silence. She returned to her chair but left the magazine untouched. Her gaze settled on a teacup, now cooling, her mind quietly stitching together the threads of something that didn't quite fit. At a time, night draped Marley Coombe. In full darkness, the air had turned sharp, windows were latched, and curtains drawn, but not everyone slept. At 11 minutes past midnight, the village held its breath. Mrs. Clara Marlowe, a stout, widowed woman now, equally for her devotion to the Women's Institute and her devastation of cold toast, was walking her dog, a feisty terrier named Ragshead, had a long evening sorting through boxes in her attic and had forgotten to take Rags out at his usual time. She had grumbled the whole way down the steps, wrapped in a coat that resembled an angry quilt, and muttered something about teeing of chill before sunrise. As she neared the bend in the lane just across from the Hargreaves property, Rags began to growl. It was not his usual bark, not the one he used on hedgehogs or the occasional stray cat. This was deeper, more guttural, a growl that came from the chest, not the throat. Then he barked his shirt, sharp and insistent, and yanked hard against his leash. Rags. "Stop it, useless creature," Clara hissed, pulling back, but Rags was frozen now, his small body tense, fur bristling, his eyes fixed on the upper floor of the Hargreaves. And that's when Clara heard it, the sound of something shifting a wooden groan from inside. And then a muffled thump, then silent sointle. A single floorboard, one near the front of the house, gave a slow, audibly quick. Clara stood motionless for nearly a full minute, heart hammering in her chest. Then, gripping Rags tighter, she turned back and fled towards Constable's cottage, half stumbling, half running by one. Marley Combe was no longer a sleeper. Police lantern swung slowly in the night air to uniformed officers, along with Inspector Douglas from Heatherton had arrived at the gate to the Hargrave Vest property. Rusted and reluctant, was opened for the first time in years. The house was dark, but not empty. A light was eventually found on the upper landing, in-out electric, but the faint orange glow of a candle stub burned nearly down Toit's wick. The hallway smelled of dust and something else, something sour and sharp like old copper left in the rain. And then inside the drawing room beneath, a long-forgotten canvas sheet that had once protected the carpet from paint spills, body lying face-down, arms unnaturally twisted, lifeless, a pool of dried blood trailing toward a loose board in the center of the room. Same floorboard that had creaked, that had cried at midnight. Chapter 2. Demand. With no name. Inspector Douglas had seen his fair share of bodies, but there was something different about this one. Something quietly unnerving stood in the cold drawing room of the Hargreaves house, the damp scent of neglect pressing against the walls. His torch beam hovered over the corpse, sprawled on the rug mound. Middle-aged, well-dressed, but not ostentatious shoes were polished. His nails were clean. His left wrist bore the faded tan line of a watch that was no longer there. Yet not a single piece of identification can be found on him. No wallet, no papers, not even a label in his coat. Only item of interest was a small silver key clutched tightly in his right hand. He fought, muttered. Constable Merrick crouched nearby. Look at the way his hands twisted that key. It's as if he wouldn't let it go, even as he hesitated. Glancing up, Inspector Douglas straightened, brushing his mustache with a single finger. Yes, or perhaps he wasn't allowed to let go. The room held his breath. The floorboard, the one beneath the rug, had indeed shifted. It was raised slightly at the corner, splintered from what appeared to be the imprint of a heavy shoe, not from the man now lying dead. Beside it, the constable had already noted no dust or dirt on the soles of his shoes. Someone else had stepped there. Someone was strong enough to crush the edge of the board beneath their weight, or in the act of violence. B. 2 o'clock a.m. The body had been removed, the room sealed, and the villagers whole had gathered like moths to the edge of the police cordon, were finally told Togo home, but no one would sleep. That night Miss Marple, for her part, had not gone to the Harry's house. She did not need Toynstead. She sat quietly in her front parlor, sipping warm milk and knitting. A shawl in pale blue wool, she moved her needle. Slowly, her eyes focused on nothing and everything when the news arrived by word of mouth, first from young Ruby Cresswell, who had heard it from her mother, who had heard it from Clara. Marlowe, Miss Marple, only no dead a man, they say. Ruby told her, breathlessly dead, found on the rug, Clara's dog heart. Him screaming at midnight. Miss Marple murmured, her fingers pausing just for a heartbeat. Rather theatrical, don't you think? Ruby blinked. Theatrical. Miss Marple looked up gently. Most people who were killed in cold blood don't scream at all, dear. That only happens. Tia, in the Penny Dreadfuls. Ruby, unsure if she'd been corrected or dismissed, offered a confused smile and eventually drifted out next. Morning arrived, gray and raw, with a thin mist curling around Marley Combs trees and rooftops like the memory of a dream that wouldn't leave. By 7:30, the high street was already buzzing, not with customers, but with Curiosity. Blackheart pub postponed its usual deliveries, the bakery stayed shut, and the post office, typically the source of village gossip, now became its vortex. I heard it was an insurance man, said Mrs. Dempsey, fanning herself dramaticalism. The cold, ridiculous, I heard it. Was a spy, said Mr. Collingwood. Tannily, seriously, Mrs. Ashbury, the butcher's wife, leaned in with hushed breath, a lover back from the dead, to haunt the Hargreaves line. How these old houses are. Miss Marple walked past them all, nodding pleasantly, but stopping only once at the notice board near the postbox there. Asif, placed deliberately to be seen by the right person, was a flyer room for Lead Marley. Combe, cottage, quiet, lodger, preferred no pets. Apply within the paper was new, the ink still. Smelled faintly of the printer's diet. Was not there yesterday, nor the day beforehand. Something about it tickled her memory. Later that afternoon, Inspector Douglas knocked at Miss Marple's door. "Ah," she said, opening it, "I thought you might." He raised a brow. "Did you now?" "I put the kettle on," she replied. Stepping aside, they sat in her neat parlor, the lace doilies freshly pressed, the tea steaming in matching china cups. He'd visited before, during the unfortunate poisoning case, 3 summers ago, and had learned, like most sensible men, that Miss Marple's tea came with a side of insight. Fingerprint. Someone had watched from that window or waited, and it wasn't long before she heard the soft crunch of approaching footsteps behind her, admiring. "There, Katja," came Felix Landon's voice. Miss Marple turned Politello, moved silently. "Mr. Landon," he offered that same polished smile. "Old habits. From theater work, you learn to move like you're not there." "How appropriate." He joined her at the gate, glancing toward the house. "I suppose it's part of the village tours," said everyone wants to see where it happened. Curiosity and memory often share a bed miss. Marple replied gently. He gave a short laugh. "You are poetessime observant. For example, you took Marley Cottage with astonishing speed. It was available, but only listed the same day. You arrived." He turned to face hurtfully Miss Marple. "Are you accusing me of something, of noticing things?" "Yes, I suppose I am." He met her eyes. "I didn't kill him." She didn't blink. "I never said you did, but I believe you may know who did." He hesitated, then, almost sadly, said, "Not yet, but I think I'm close." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving her alone by the iron gate. But he had said too much, and perhaps not even realized it. "I think I'm close." It's close to what the truth, or the next move. At that evening, Inspector Douglas visited again. He carried a folder under one arm, a look of cautious interest on his face. "Miss Marple," he said, as she welcomed him inside, "I believe you're already half ahead of me." "Only half," Chesmelt, handing him a cup of tea. "The fingerprint on the letter at the post office doesn't match the man found in the house." "Of course not. And the real Nicholas Hargrave as well. It appears he's been missing in London for over 2 years. No bank activity, no confirmed sightings, not even a dental record update." Miss Marple nodded, because the man who came here, whoever he was, wanted to be Nicholas Hargrave. Douglas opened the folder, and the fingerprint does match someone else. A. Felix Landon, real name Felix Langford. Minor fraud, petty theft. Nothing violent, but smart. Very smart, miss. Marple's voice was almost a whisper, which means he came here not to hide, but to claim something. Douglas leaned back, a legacy, or a secret one buried under the floorboards of a house that had too many memories and too few witnesses. Out of the village, settled into its evening stillness, but Miss Marple knew the stillness would not last long, because someone had come to Marley Combe wearing another man's name, and now another man was dead. Chapter 5. Whispers beneath the floorboards. The days in Marley Combe slipped by with an uneasy rhythm, each one echoing the last over the growing tension. Beneath the surface, the village, so accustomed to the gentle predictability of its season's hand, its residents now seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for some unseen truth to finally reveal itself. Miss Marple, meanwhile, had taken to spending long afternoons in her sitting room, surrounded by stacks of old newspapers, handwritten letters, and a sort of delicate notebooks that held secrets more than records. The mystery of the dead man in the Hargreaves house had gripped her attention, not only because of the murder itself, but because of what lay beneath, both literally and figuratively, that morning, as the mist curled through the narrow lanes like the ghost of something long forgotten. Miss Marple was visited by Clara Marmaro, still shaken from her experience the night the body was found. "Miss Marple," Clara began, her voice trembling despite the early hour. "I've been meaning to tell you something, miss." Marple gestured gently toward the armchair by the window. "Please," said Clara, What is it? Clara settled herself with a shaky sigh. That night one, I was walking rags past the Hargreaves' house. I thought I heard something beneath the house. It's not footsteps, but whispers. Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly. Whispers ceased, soft like voices, low and muffled. He thought it must be the wind at first, but Rags wouldn't stop growling. You never mentioned this to the police. Clara shook her head. No, I thought they wouldn't believe me who listens to whispers beneath. Floorboards, Miss Marple smiled gently, more than you might think. That evening, after Clara left, Miss Marple returned to the Hargreaves' house, not the exterior buto, the records and old documents she had gathered from the village archive and the estate of Fish, spread the papers across her small table, estate maps, property, transfer records, even a brittle diary penned by the Major's late wifey. An entry caught her eye. August 14th, 1938. Nicholas found a strange, loose board beneath the drawing room floor. He spoke of hiding things better left unseen. Miss Marple pressed her finger to the page. Had the Major's son been hiding something beneath the floorboards along the following day? She sought out Mr. Tom Fletcher, a village carpenter, a stoic man with hands worn from decades of labor. Tom was the only one who might know about the floorboards better than anyone else. Over a pot of strong tea at the Black Hart, Miss Marple carefully broached the subjectum. I understand you did some work at the Hargreaves' house before it was abandoned. Tom nodded slowly. Yes, Mrs. Marple. About 3 years ago, the Major escaped to check the floors for rot. Said he was concerned about a strange creak in the drawing room. And did you find anything unusual? Tom scratched his chin. A few loose boards. Nothing alarming, but there was some that felt different, sounded hollow, like something was beneath it. I lifted, but it was nailed down too tightly to remove without making noise. Major said leave. It be said, some secrets were better left under lock and kindnesses. Marple's eyes gleamed. Did you see anything under the board? Tom shook his head. No, just dust and old newspaper fragments. But I did notice scratches like from a key or a blade on the underside of the wood. That night, Miss Marple sat by her window, the shawl around her shoulders and a single candle flickering beside her. The quiet of the village pressed close. Viewed inside, her mind questions churned. Had come to Marley, pretending to be Nicholas Hargreaves. What was hidden beneath the floorboard that cried at midnight? And what whispers haunted the walls of a house long emptied of its spine? Family, her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. It was Felix Landon. I hope I'm not disturbing you, he said, cautiously. Not at all, Miss Marple replied, gesturing him into what do I owe the pleasure. He looked tired, more worn than before. I have been thinking, Miss Marple, a booth key, the one clutched in the dead man's hand. Yes, I believe it's a key. Tozelmething. Personal, not a door or a safe, but a box, a diary perhaps, something that belonged to the Hargreaves family. Miss Marple nodded. And you think this Anathing is why he was killed, possibly? But more than that, I believe the true danger lies in what the diary contains, secrets that could unravel more than just one family. She studied him quietly. You seem closer to the truth than you admit. It gave a faint smile. Maybe, or maybe I'm just trying to keep up. As Felix left that evening, Miss Marple felt the weight of the mystery settle over Marley, like the gathering fog beneath. The floorboard's whispers still lingered, and somewhere in the village a spread waited to be unearthed. Chapter 6, Secrets. In the shadows, the village of Malecon, once draped in golden hues of early autumn, now found itself wrapped in the slow creeping chill of approaching winter. The leaves had turned brittle and brown, littering the narrow lanes like forgotten memories. And yet beneath their surface of this seasonal quiet, the undercurrents of unease deepened with each passing day. Miss Marple, ever the patient observer, had long since ceased to expect outward drama. Instead, she waited for the subtle to reveal itself. Glanced the hesitation, the whispered hesitation behind closed doors. That morning, Miss Marple received a letter No return address, only her name delicately written in an unfamiliar hand. She broke the seal carefully and unfolded the paper. Meet me at the old mill at dusk alone. The truth leaves beneath the floorboards. No signature miss. Marple's heart quickened, but hers betrayed nothing. Such notes were the currency of secrets, and in Marlecomb's secrets were more valuable than gold be late afternoon. She found herself walking toward the abandoned mill on the outskirts of the village. The mill had stirred, silent for decades, its wooden blades frozen in time, its stone walls darkened by moss and rain. Few dared to venture near, save for the occasional child daring their courage, or the occasional fox slipping through these shadows as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gray mist. Marple waited beneath the egnod oak that guarded the mill's entrance. Footsteps approached. Deliberate, measured Felix Landon emerged from the shadows, his coat buttoned tightly against the chill eyes. Alert, you came, he said quietly, as you requested. But why the secrecy? Felix, why here? He glanced around, then lowered his voice. Because not everyone in Marley is ready to hear the truth, and some truths are better shared in places where the walls can't listen, miss. Marple studied him very well. Speak plainly. He hesitated, then began. The man found in Hargreaves' house. He wasn't who he claimed to be. I suspected as much. He was soon imposter, someone who knew the family's secrets, someone desperate to claim what wasn't his. Miss Marple folded her hands in Nicholas Hargreaves. That true heir? Felix nodded. Nicholas disappeared years ago, lost to the city and its own demons. But before he vanished, he discovered something buried beneath the drawing room floor. Marple's eyes sharpened. A diary. Felix smiled faintly. More than a diary, a collection of letters, proof of a scandal that could ruin reputations, names, dates, confessions, things better left forgotten. He looked away. I came here to protect us. Secrets. But someone else came to find them. As dusk deepened into night, the mill grew colder. Miss Marple felt the weight of Felix's words settle like frost. Who else knew? She asked softly. Felix's jaw tightened. That's the question, isn't it? The villagers, the family, and someone who would kill to keep the past buried. Suddenly, a rust lead showed from the edge of the woods. Both turned sharply, but saw only the dancing shadows of the trees. Miss Marple smiled thinly. Marlekomb is full of whispers, Felix, but one whisper can become a scream. Felix nodded grimly and that scream will soon shatter the silence. The next morning, as the village awoke beneath a pale sky, the police returned to the Hargreaves' house with a warrant. They pried open the stubborn floorboard. It's one that had cried at midnight, revealing the small, dust-covered box beneath. Inside lay a bundle of letters, tied with a faded ribbon, a tarnished silver locket, and a folded piece of parchment, well unsigned. Miss Marple was there when the inspector lifted the letters out carefully. Her fingers trembled slightly as she touched the parchment. The ink was faded, but the names were clear. Hargreaves, Landon, and others' names, tangled in love, betrayal, and silent sad secrets. Beneath the floorboards had been unearthed as the sun set behind Marlecomb's rolling hills. Miss Marple stood alone by her window, watching the village breathe beneath the twilights. Knew the coming days would test the village's calm. Bold wounds would reopen and hidden faces would emerge from the shadows. But she also knew this truth, once uncovered, could never be buried again. Chapter 7. Faces behind the veiled. Discovery beneath the floorboards had shattered the fragile calm that Marlekomb had maintained since Thibody was found. The village was alive with speculation, the whispered names from the letters sparking gossip as much as fear. Miss Marple watched it all with a quiet but keen eye, knowing well that beneath every whispered suspicion lay deeper truth, waiting patiently to emerge. The letters, though faded and brittle, told stories of secret meetings, whispered promises, and betrayals that had been carefully hidden beneath polite smiles and Sunday prayers. There were mentions of forbidden love affairs and debts that no ledger could record, but most notably was a reference to a veil, a metaphor for the silence that those involved had sworn to maintain. Miss Marple found herself drawn repeatedly to the name Elenina. Landon mentioned several times as a woman whose life had been irrevocably altered with these secrets. That afternoon, she decided to visit the village archives once more, searching for any record of Elenina. Landon, she hoped to piece together the life of the woman who it seemed had become the axis around which the mystery spun. Her search yielded an old photographed into a brittle folder, a young woman with sharp eyes and a slight smile standing beside a man whose features were obscured by shadow. The photograph was labeled simply, Lenina Landon, an unknown circa 1923 Miss Marple traced the lines of Elenina's face with a gentle finger, feeling the weight of the untold stories resting there. Later, over tea at the Black Hart, she spoke quietly with Mrs. Dempsey, the village's unofficial historian. Elana Landon. Mrs. Dempsey whispered a tragic figure that one married young but her husband vanished within the year. Rumor had it she was involved in something scandalous. What sort of scandal? Miss Marple pressed gently. Mars Dempsey hesitated. There was talk of a child, a secret kept from the village, and some said she never truly left Marley, just vanished beneath veil of silence. Meanwhile, Felix Landon grew increasingly less. His presence in the village became the subject of hushed conversations. In weary glances, he too seemed haunted by ghosts, both old and new. One evening, Miss Marple found him standing by the Hargreaves' gate, staring into the gathering darkness. "You carry a heavy burden, Felix," she said. Soft light nodded. Secrets have a way of weighing on the soul, Miss Marple. In summertimes, they demand a reckoning. As night fell, a sudden storm swept over Marlene. Rain lashing against windows and wind howling through the trees. Tempest seemed to echo the turmoil beneath the village's quiet exterior. Within her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire. The letters spread before her. She knew the veil was about to be lifted, and with it, the truth, whatever form it might take, would no longer be a secret whispered beneath floorboards, but aeriality faced by all. Chapter 8's shadows of the past morning. After the storm, Marley was washed clean and glistening, yet devilish carried a weight heavier than the recent rain. The tempest seemed a fitting metaphor for the brewing storm beneath. The surface old wounds reopened and secrets clawing to the lightness. Marple stood at her kitchen window, watching the villagers slowly resume their routines, though whispers and furtive glances were impossible to unhear. The discovery of the letters had pierced the veneer of quiet civility, exposing fractures long concealed. News traveled fast. Identity of the dead man had finally been tentatively established through a careful search of financial records and fingerprint comparisons. Was not Nicholas Hargreaves, but a man named Thomas Landon. Felix Landon strained brother, long thought lost too. London's darker Alice revelations sent ripples of confusion and suspicion through. Come, why was Thomas here? What had brought him back to the village? And why had he died beneath floorboards that whispered of hidden scenes? Miss Marple wasted no time seeking. Felix found him at the village library, poring over records with a look of grim determination. "Felix," she gently greeted. "Teased, it's catching up with you." He sighed deeply. "It seems it never left. Tell me about Thomas." Felix's eyes darkened. "Thomas was the reckless one, the shadow to my light, always chasing debts, trouble, the sort of life I tried to leave behind when I came here." "Do you believe Thomas's death was accidental?" Alex shook his head. "No, someone wanted him gone, and I feared that person is still close." Meanwhile, the village constable reported strange occurrences in empty corridors, faint voices at night, and shadows moving just by it. It's the reach of lamplight. The house at Thornhill Road, once silent now, seemed alive with restless memories. Miss Marple, unperturbed by such tales, knew the village was on edge. Fear often painted ghosts where none existed on evening as twilight faded. Miss Marple received an unexpected visitor. Elena, Landon's great niece, a young woman named Clara. Recently returning from London, I heard about the letters, Clara said softly. I believe my family's stories had finished. Yet Miss Marple nodded. Then perhaps you can help me lift the veil together. They began to unravel the threads that tied Marley. Coombs passed towards present, confronting the shadows lurking just beneath the floorboards, devilish braced for revelations. Miss Marple sensed that the true story was far more tangled than anyone had dared imagine, and that the next chapter of Malik's history was about to be written in Blood and Truth, Chapter 9. The gathering storm that Aaron Marley Combe had grown thick with anticipation, as though the Balagi self held its breath in the quiet moments before a gathering storm. The discovery of the letters, the arrival of Clara, Landon, and the unsettling truth about Thomas. Landon's death had unsettled the fragile balance that hadn't held the village together. Miss Marple sensed the undercurrents, aptention everywhere in the stiff. Nods exchanged on the high street in fellowward voices behind closed doors, and in the furtive glances cast toward the Hargreaves' house that morning, an urgent message brought Miss Marple and Inspector Douglas together at the village hall, where the local council had convened a special meeting. The room was filled with faces pale with worried whispers, fluttering like restless birds. Douglas cleared his throat. We have reason to believe that the murderer remains, and Marley's investigation is ongoing, and we ask everyone's cooperation. Miss Marple watched the crowd carefully, noting who shifted uncomfortably, who avoided Hergus, and who spoke too loudly to mask their fear. After the meeting, Miss Marple sought out Clara, Landon together. They decided it was time to confront the past directly. They returned to the Hargreaves' house, where the police had now begun a thorough search. Behind the locked doors, the drawing room seemed frozen in time, its dusty furniture and faded wallpaper witness two long buried secrets. Miss Marple's eyes fell upon the now open floorboard. Secrets, Clara, are like storms. They gather unseen, but when they break, they touch everything. Clara nodded, her face pale but resolute. Then it's time we faced him. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, an unexpected visitor arrived, a stern-faced solicitor named Mr. Graham, carrying a sealed envelope addressed to Miss Marple. The letter contained a startling revelation, a handwritten confession discovered among the late Mayor Hargreaves' possessions, hinting at a betrayal that had fractured the family decades. Before Miss Marple read the confession, slowly observing the weight of words that spoke of love, deceit, and a crime long hidden beneath the village's calm facade. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place, but the picture they formed was darker and more complex than Jan had imagined. And as dusk settled over Marley Combe, Miss Marple knew that gathering storm was about to break, and with it, the truth would finally come to light. Chapter 10. The Confession in the Attic. Confession had arrived like a thunderclap, shattering the fragile calm that still clung to Marley Combe's. Arpel sat in her sitting room, the sealed envelope lying before her on the polished oak table like a sleeping beast waiting to be awakened. With deliberate care, she broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Inside, the handwriting was unmistakably the maker's neat, precise, yet tinged with an urgency that spoke volumes to whom it may concern. There are truths in this village buried deeper than any grave. I write this confession not to seek absolution, but to unburden a soul weighed by years of silence. The events that led to the tragedy in our family were not born of malice alone, but of desperation, fear, and love. Twisted Constance made this letter serve as a beacon for those seeking the truth beneath their floorboards. The letter went on to detail a long-hidden affair between Ilalana Landon and a man whose identity was veiled in cryptic phrases. The one who came before midnight, the shadow that walked unnoticed, the betrayer whose name should never be spoken. Miss Marple's mind raced. Could the confession finally reveal the identity of the murderer? That afternoon, she climbed the narrow stairs to the attic of the Hargreaves, the very place where the major had stored this confession. Among dusty trunks and forgotten relics, the room was cold, smelling of mothballs and old wood. but it held a solemn dignity. There among faded photographs and DLO letters, she found a small wooden box, intricately carved, its surface worn smooth by time. Inside lay a diary bound in cracked leather, its page filled with Ilanina's handwriting. Miss Marple settled by the attic window, slight, fading as she began to read. The diary spoke of a woman torn between loyalty and love as secrets kept to protect those she cared for, and of a night when betrayal shattered their fragile world. As she read, Miss Marple felt the weight of decades pressing down upon her. The lives altered, the truths concealed, and the floorboard that cried out midnight, bearing silent witness to it all. When she finally closed the diary, twilight had deepened into night. The village bellow was quiet, but the storm was far from over. Miss Marple knew that the path to justice was lined with shadows, and Thattenly, by confronting the past fully, could Marley Combe hope to help. Chapter 11. The Dance of Deception Diary's revelation sent a ripple through Miss Marple's mind. Ilalani's words painted a picture of a complicated web, love, jealousy, and betrayal, entwined in ways more intricate than the villager schooled have guessed. But even as the past unfurled before her, Miss Marple understood one fundamental truth: the past does not stay. Buried quietly, it treated tones, demanding reckoning. That evening, the village hall was alive with its usual hum. The Women's Institute had gathered for the monthly meeting, an event that rarely escaped gossip or whispers. But tonight, there was a subtle tension, an undercurrent Miss Marple felt immediated. She entered. She noticed Felix Landon standing near the back, his expression real dull, but his eyes scanning the room as if searching for some near something. The meeting began with the usual pleasantries, but the conversation soon shifted to the tragedy that had unsettled came. The room held its breath as local voices speculated on motives, suspects, and secrets still hidden. Miss Marple listened, her sharp eye piecing together fragments of overheard remarks and fleeting expressions. After the meeting, as the hall emptied, Miss Marple approached Felix. "There's more to this than what's been said," she said, quietly nodded. "Yes, the dance of deception is intricate, every step carefully measured." Glanced toward the exit, and sometimes the most trusted dancers are writhy ones who lead us astray. Felix's jaw tightened. "We must be careful when we trust." Outside, the night was thick with its shadows moved along the village streets like silent watchers. Miss Marple knew that soon the dance would reach its climax, and the veil of secrecy would be lifted whether Marley was ready or not. Chapter 12. It's the whispered warning. Marley awoke under a heavy sky, the morning light muted and gray, as if the heavens themselves were hesitant to unveil. The village streets were quieter than usual, an unspoken caution settling over the inhabitants like a thick fog. Miss Marple moved deliberately through thrones, her senses attuned to the subtle shifts in mood and gesture. It was in these small details: a lowered voice, a sidelong glance, a hastened step that, the truth, often revealed itself. As she passed the post office, Edith Gross caught her arm, eyes wide with concern. "Miss Marple," she whispered urgently, "I found this slipped under the door last night." She handed over a small folded note, its paper worn and the ink faint but legible, bare the shadows that walk in daylight. Some truths are safer left unspoken. Miss Marple folded the note carefully, her expression unreadably to her at the E1 black heart. The usual murmur of conversation was laced with tension. Felix Landon sat alone in a corner, nursing a cup of tea, his gaze distant. Miss Marple approached quietly. Warnings seldom come without reason, she observed, nodded. "Someone wants us to stop digging." To forget her, to fear the conversation was interrupted by a sudden commotion. A young woman burst into the pub, breathless and pale. "Miss Marple, Felix, you must come quickly. It's Clara. She's disappeared." The news spread like wildfire. Clara Landon, the woman who had come seeking the truth of her family's past, was Missing the village was plunged into uncertainty and fierce dusk fell. Miss Marple stood once more before the Hargreaves' housed floorboard, beneath still a silent witness to secrets. And Leash whispered to the gathering shadows, "The past has many voices, and some will go to great lengths to keep them silent." Chapter 13. The Vanishing Act. Clara Landon's disappearance struck Marley like a sudden, chill wind, unexpected, unsettling, and impossible to ignore. The villagers whispered in hushed tones their conversations, punctuated by sharp glances toward the Hargreaves' house, as if it alone held the key to the mystery. Thought now gripped them all. Miss Marple sat by the window of her cottage, the fading light casting long shadows across the room. The news had spread quickly, but no one seemed to know where Clara had gone, or if she had left by choice. Inspector Douglas arrived just as twilight deepened. His face changed with concern. "Mrs. Marple, we've organized search parties, but so far nothing. It's as if she vanished into thin air." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps she found what she was looking for and chose to disappear. Some truths are too dangerous to face. Meanwhile, Felix Blandon was restless, his usual composure fractured by worry. He confided in Miss Marple that Clara had uncovered something significant, something that might explain why she had been taken. "We're dealing with forces that don't want this village's past revealed," has it grimly. Miss Marple agreed, and those forces will stop at nothing. That night, a ladder arrived at Miss Marple's door, sealed with a crimson wax stamp. Inside was a single sentence: "Stop digging, or the next will not vanish." Warning was clear and chilling as Marley Combe braced herself against Dunge. Now, Miss Marple prepared to confront the shadows, once more determined to unearth the truth before more voices were silenced. Forever. Chapter 14. The silent, breath-warning letter lay unopened on Miss Marple's polished oak table for several long moments. The crimson wax seal, unbroken, keenness, seemed to pulse with silent menace beneath the flickering candlelight outside. The village of Marley wrapped itself in an uneasy stillness, as if the shadows themselves had thickened, waiting. Miss Marple's hands hovered over the Latour, her mind weighing the implications. Whoever had sent this was watching, waiting, and they wanted the past to remain buried. Inspector Douglas arrived amid morning, his usual reserve replaced by a furrowed brow and taut expression. "Mrs. Marple, I understand the letter was found this morning." She nodded. "Yes, it's a clear threat." Douglas sighed. "The disappearances Clarendon has unsettled the village. There are those who fear what revelations might bring." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with quiet resolve. "Then we must be the ones to shine light into the darkness." That afternoon, she convened a small gathering of trusted villagers, those whose loyalty to truth was beyond question. Among them were Tom Fletcher, the carpenter, Mrs. Dempsey, the historian, and Reverend Pelling, whose faith was tempered by wisdom. Together, they planned a search for Clara and sought to unravel the threads of the tangled past. Bound them all. As dusk fell, a sudden cry pierced the village air. Sharp desperation closed the search party. Rushed toward the sound, hearts pounding. They found Clara, disheveled but alive, near the edge of the old mill. Spoke and hurried whispers, warning of those who would kill to keep secrets. Miss Marple listened, her mind racing. The silent threat had become clear. Marley Combe's past was a dangerous place, one where shadows held power and silence was a weapon. Chapter 15. The Unseen Enemy. Clara's return was both a relief and a new beginning. Her eyes, once bright with hope, carried the weight of fear and secrets too heavy for one person to birth. Villagers gathered in hushed circles, eager for answers, yet wary of the dangers. Clara hinted at Miss Marple, sat beside her in the quiet of her cottage, encouraging her to share what she had uncovered during her disappearance. "No, Clara," whispered voice trembling. "Ones who want the past buried there watching us, waiting for Amistad." Miss Marple nodded solemnly in that issue. "We must move carefully. but swiftly. Meanwhile, Inspector Douglas increased the police presence around key locations, yet the sense of an unseen enemy lurking just beyond sight persisted. Felix Landon confided in Miss Marple his suspicion that the murderer was someone close, hidden behind the village's facade. Of knowingly as tensions rose, Miss Marple realized that the true danger lay not in these shadows of the past, but in the hearts of those still living. Battle for Malcolm's soul was far from over. Chapter 16. The Mask of Innocence. Marley's streets had grown colder, eerie frost hinting at winter's approach, yet it was not the chill in the air that unsettled Miss Marple. It was the coldness behind certain eyes, the calculated calm of those who wore innocence like a masking. The village square whispers now carried names once unspoken, casing shadows over neighbors and friends. Alike trust frayed like an old thread shawl, and suspicion became the currency of conversation. Miss Marple observed this growing tension with a careful eye. She knew that the murderer thrived not in isolation, but among the unsuspecting. Cloaked by the warmth of familiar Russian afternoon, she paid a visit to Mrs. Ashbury, the butcher's wife, known for her sharp tongue. In sharper intuition, Mrs. Ashbury, Miss Marple, began, have you noticed anyone acting differently? Anyone whose kindness feels rehearsed? The woman's gaze flickered. Kay, now that you mention it, the vicar's assistant has been quite attentively too attentive. If you ask me, Miss Marple made a mental note. Sometimes the smallest observations held the greatest truths. That evening at the Argraveshus, a clandestine meeting took place. Felix Landon, Inspector Douglas, and Miss Marple gathered their faces. Set with determination, they discussed the secrets, unearthed the treats made, and the delicate dance of uncovering the truth without provoking. Unseen enemy, Miss Marple spoke quietly but firmly. The mask will slip, it always does, outside the village. Held its breath, waiting for the moment when innocence would fall away and the true face of the murderer would be revealed. Chapter 17. The crack in the facade deck home that once graced Marley Combe was fracturing slowly, inevitably then depainted. Doors and manicured hedges. Cracks were appearing in the village's polished facade, revealing unease and fear festering beneath mists. Marple noted the change. Keenly smiles were tighter, greetings colder, and the comfortable chatter replaced by pointed silence. The killer walked among them, masked by the very normality that made their presence invisible. That afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived at Miss Marple's cottage. A local school teacher, Miss Harper, clutching a folded piece of paper. With trembling hands, Miss Marple, I think this might help, she said, voice barely above a whisper. The note contained a hostile scrolled message. He knows what you found. Beware the man with the silver watch. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The silver watch, an item missing from the dead man's wrist. Meanwhile, Inspector Douglas was piecing together alibis and motives, but the web of lies grew more tangled with each new revelation. Felix Landon, burdened by guilt and fear, confessed to Miss Marple his suspicion that the murderer was closer than any of them had imagined. As twilight deepened, Miss Marple stood once more before the Hargreaves house, sensing that the time for shadows was ending and the truth was poised to break free, whether the village was ready or not. Chapter 18. The final curtain. Village of Marley held its breath. The threads of deceit, long woven and carefully hidden, now began to unravel under Miss Marple's quiet but relentless scrutiny. In the dim light of the drawing room at the Hargreaves house gathered were those who had come to play their parts in a drama decades in the making. Inspector Douglas, Felix Landon, Clara Landon, and Miss Marple herself. Miss Marple stood by the fireplace, the flickering flames casting shadows across her calm face. Tonight, she began, we uncovered the truth hidden beneath the floorboards, the secrets kept by love, fear, and betrayals. Turned to Felix. You came here to protect your family's name, but the truth is stronger than silence. Then to the assembled company, Cher counted the chain of events, letters, confessions, whispered warnings, and the man who had died. Thomas Landon whose presence had shattered the village peace. One by one, the masks slipped away. A hidden motive revealed a desperate act, confessed to love, betrayed. The murder caught between loyalty and fear stood exposed as the final curtain fell. Malika Mek's hold. A village forever changed, but freed from the weight of its pastness. Marple watched, quietly knowing that in the shadows were secrets. High justice must always find its way. Chapter 19. The unveiling truth. The air in the Hargreaves' drawing room was thick with tension as Miss Marple delicately unveiled the truth that had eluded Marley. For so long, faces, once familiar, now seemed alien, their owner shadowed by the revelations that had come to light. She spoke clearly, her voice steady and unyielding. Thomas Landon's death was no mere accident, nor random violence. It was the culmination of years of secrets, betrayal, and fear that gripped this village. She recounted the intertwined fates. Nana Landon's hidden past, the secret letters, and the fractured family ties had all led to that fatal night. Each detail connected like pieces of a delicate puzzle falling perfectly into place. The room fell silent, save for the crackling fire, as the weight of destiny settled upon everyone present. Inspector Douglas nodded, grimly preparing to take the necessary steps to bring justice aflex. Landon's expression softened, a mixture of relief and sorrow. Clara Landon, though shaken, found strength in the unveiling. Her questions finally answered. Outside the village of Marlicum felt a subtle shift, as if the air had lightened. The shadows that had long haunted the floorboards had been lifted, and thought the past could never be changed. The future was now open, untainted. In Doubtful. Chapter 20. Peace beneath the floorboards. Village of Marley awoke to a new dawn, crisp, clear, and unburdened by the heavy secrets that had once weighed so heavily upon its heart. The case that had shadowed the village for months was finally closed, and with it, the restless whispers beneath the floorboards had quieted. Miss Marple sat in her favorite chair by his window, a soft smile touching her lips as she watched the morning sun spill golden light across the rolling hills. The familiar rhythms of village life were returning, neighbors greeting each other, warmly, children's laughter echoing through the lanes, and the comforting hum of everyday errands resuming their steady pacings. Inspector Douglas had formally closed the investigation, commending Miss Marple for her keen insight and unwavering dedication to uncovering the truth. Felix Landon, though forever marked by the family's dark history, had begun the slow process of healing. Supported by Clara and the community that had once feared his presence, the Hargreaves' house, once a place of sorrow and silence, was now said to be restored. Its floorboards replaced, its walls repaired, a symbol of renewal and hope. Miss Marple sipped her afternoon tea. She reflected on the lessons learned. That truth, she mused, was often buried beneath layers of fear and deception, but it had a way of rising to the surface, persistent, patient, and relentless. And while some wounds might never fully heal, facing them was the first step toward peace. The floorboard that cried at midnight had finally found its silence. Marley, too, had found a measure of Pacia, quiet assurance that no matter the shadows of the past, the light of truth would always prevail.